In this presentation, we will generate and review reports after the first month of data has been input into the system within QuickBooks Pro 2019. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. The three reports we will look at is the profit and loss or income statement, the balance sheet, and the transaction report by date. These are going to be important reports, obviously the first two being two of our major financial statement type reports. If you're following along with this problem, you can use these two reports and check your numbers compared to these two. It's also good to check your numbers compared to these two, whether you're following along with this problem or not, obviously with the balance sheet and the income statement. And another very useful report to look at is the transaction report by date, because we'll see a month's worth of transactions. The transaction report by date will give us all that activity not listed out by first account and then by date, as would be the case with a general ledger type of report, but it'll give us all the activity by date. And that's really useful when analyzing a certain period of time to see if all the data was input, comparing and contrasting if we're doing some kind of grading, or if we're checking our numbers to some other system that should be the same. Obviously, if we look through all the transaction details, great report in order to do something such as that. So here we are in QuickBooks in the home page. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows, go into the view tab and the open windows list. We're going to create the reports, first being the balance sheet. So we're going to go to reports in the drop down up top. We're going to go down to company and financials and then scroll down to balance sheet standard. So we'll select the balance sheet standard, and then we're going to change the dates. You could change them here. I'm going to change the customized date range. This time we're only going to have the first month of operation. So it's going to go from 01/01/19 to 01/31/19. So January 1st, 2019 to January 31st, that's the time period for which we have entered data into this particular problem. Enter or OK. And notice it only has one date here. When we're concerned about just printing this report, we only need this one date. It doesn't matter what the prior date is when we looked at the date range. But if we do have questions with this report, it's nice to have the date range, because then when we double click on any of these items, it'll give us the detail by date range rather than just giving us one day. So that's the purpose for that. Now these are the numbers we have so far in this particular problem. So if you're going to compare and contrast numbers and try to see if everything looks correct, you may want to start with the balance sheet, then go to the income statement, and then try to drill down on any items that you think is out of balance. So if you're working on this problem, obviously we want to check these numbers to your numbers. If you're just trying to review the numbers at the end of the time period, do a little check, do a little audit for yourself, then you really want to go through the balance sheet accounts and go through them and see if they are reasonable, and possibly go through them and check them off to any kind of documentation or subsidiary ledgers that you can. So for example, the cash account, we're not doing the bank reconciliations yet, but we will do them soon. These of course should be supported by bank reconciliations. So at the end of the month, once we're done with the month, we will reconcile, and that will reconcile cash and give us assurance about cash, which gives us a lot of assurance about other items as well. The accounts receivable, we could tie that to the receivable detail by going to the reports and customers and receivables, and then going to the customer balance detail or the summary, either one. And we can see the customers that still owe us money here, which should support that number. And we can go through here and say, okay, is that reasonable? Do these people still owe us money? Do we need to send them another invoice? Have we given up on any of these payments? In which case we should write off these amounts. So if these are still current, we could say, okay, I'm fairly sure that that 1,215 is still outstanding, a legitimate number. I'm going to close this out, and that'll kind of tie out this number. Inventory, obviously we can tie out to the inventory report if we're generating inventory within the system by going to reports, going to inventory, and then I'm going to go to the inventory valuation summary. And this will be a supporting documentation, date 01/31/19. If it doesn't match, it's probably a date thing. Or there could be problems with the inventory report because inventory is a bit complex. But anyways, the cost should be $1,944. if it ties out, you have some supporting documentation. You want to say, oh, is that correct? Do we have this amount of inventory on hand? If I physically count it, 5 units, these particular guitars, 1 ELP, Les Paul, 1 Epiphone standard hollow body, we should be able to count those and tie that out. So if we close that out, then we've got the prepaid insurance. We can look at the insurance policy and say, did we actually pay that amount? And how much of that policy has expired? If this amount should represent the amount that has not yet expired. And then we have the short-term investments. And of course, we can, if those are in stocks and bonds, we can look at our stocks and bonds statements and say, is that number still accurate? And we might have to adjust it for short-term gains depending on how we're tracking gains and losses within the system. Are we? We won't get into that now. Undeposited funds. This is another item where we want to say, do we actually have those checks? We should have these checks on hand. If we double click on it, that we're going to go to the bank with to deposit those. If we don't have those and we have something in undeposited funds, then we probably have some error that we should take a look at the end of the time period. The furniture and fixtures, that should be the same as what we input into the furniture and fixtures. We should be supporting that, or will be later, with a depreciation schedule that we will need to do to track the furniture and fixtures. Our tax preparer may help us to provide that information. Visa card, we can check our Visa statement, and this should tie out to basically how much we owe on the credit card. The payroll liabilities, this should tie out to our payroll process that we had processed, and we should get into a routine, of course, of paying these payroll liabilities in a systematic way, whatever the requirements are for our particular circumstances and location. Sales tax payable, this represents sales tax that we accumulated, that we owe to the state. And again, we should be accumulating that and paying it on a periodic basis. So this would be represented what we still owe. So we want to check that, see if it looks reasonable, and it would be backed up and supported by the invoices and sales receipts that we had made, typically for merchandise. And then we've got the loan payable, which of course we can support that number by looking at any loan documentation we had with the bank and any payments we had made on it. And then we've got the owner's equity. Now note, if you look at the balance sheet and you're comfortable with all the other amounts on the balance sheet, and you don't think there's anything missing and that all the numbers look correct, then the equity section you would think would be correct, because that would mean that the assets have to equal the liabilities plus equity. So total equity then, you would think, should be reasonable if all other accounts on the balance sheet are correct. That's why the balance sheet's a good place to start when you start your audit of something, or just reviewing to see if your numbers are correct. Just going through the systematic and looking through all the balance sheet accounts and seeing if they look correct as of a certain point in time, in this case the end of January, would be a good way to go. So check your numbers to this number. We're then going to print these. I'm going to print these a couple different ways, and we'll start off by exporting to Excel, and we'll explain why that is, and it's the same explanation we have had in the past. So we're going to go to Excel, and I'm going to create a new worksheet, and this time we're going to export this to an existing workbook. Going to browse to find that workbook, and we're going to I'm going to put this one on the desktop under Get Great Guitars Reports. Going to make another reports, and actually we want section 7, so I'm going to go into section 7, and we don't have anything there yet, so I'm going to put it here, and I'm just going to call it section 7 report for us. Obviously in real life we would want something like financial statements possibly, and the date of them, January report, maybe January reports or something like that. I'm going to put it in place, more like a homework problem that we are working on section 7. So we're going to say okay and open, and section 7 report, file not found. File not found. I'm going to close this back out, and that's because I went to existing workbook. Let's go to a new workbook and then try this again. We'll go export, and it's not going to actually go to where we're going to put it here. It's going to actually make a new workbook, which we will then save to the location we had just looked at. So here's our new workbook. We've got the sheet here. I'm just going to double click on it to change the name, call it a balance sheet. And I usually go to the View tab up top, and get rid of the split panes. So I'm going to remove in the windows and split panes, we're going to remove that. And that's what we'll keep for now. I'm not going to format it any other way. It looks like it fits on one page wide. That's all I'm really concerned with. If we go to this item, which is the page layout, we can see that if we print it, it will then have the header on it and everything. So let's go to the rest of the reports, and then we'll come back to some options within QuickBooks and how to give this information to others. Before we do that, though, we're going to save this. So we're going to go to File, Save As. Gonna browse and put it back to where we were looking at before. Gonna go to the desktop for me. We're gonna go to Get Great Guitars. We're gonna go to Reports, Section 7, and then again I'm just gonna call it the Section 7 Reports and save. Okay, yeah, it's not. That's a macro error. So I'm going to close this out. That's the first one. Now let's go to the profit and loss. I'm going to go. Now note when we go to the profit and loss, it ties out to the balance sheet by having this amount, this 6,221 will tie out to the profit and loss if we had the same date range, which will be January. So reports, company and financial, profit and loss. We're going to go through 01/01/19 to 12/31/19. And there's our profit and loss. Net income is a loss, 6,221.93. Now again, it's more difficult to go through each of these numbers and basically verify them because these are timing statements. If we had all of our balance sheet accounts correct, you would think that these numbers, at least in total, would be reasonable. But to go through and double check on these, you can go through each of these items and say, okay, what does this consist of? These are the invoices or sales receipts, which would be in the merchandise. All the items would be invoices or sales receipts because that's when we get revenue. Closing this out, same would be for service, except for they would be for service items. Cost of goods sold, if we go into that, again, all invoices and sales receipts because that's the inventory that we sold. So this would only be related to inventory items that we sold with an invoice or a sales receipt. And then we've got the expenses. We've got the office supplies, probably would be mainly checks that we would have in here. So we can verify the detail. If we've got the payroll, double clicking on that. Payroll checks, there's only 2 checks, but they're broken out by payroll item. Closing that out. And then we've got the utilities. We wrote 1 check there. Looks reasonable. And, oh, that was telephone, and then utilities. So there we have these items here. Now, note that one way to check the income statement might be easier is to check, a comparison from year to year and see if it looks reasonable from year to year, or if we have any drastic swings in the income statement. So if net income looks a lot different from one month to the other, then that, of course, would be an indication that we might want to check and say, did we do a lot better or worse this month, or is there some kind of problem with our information? So you can check your numbers to these numbers, and then we're going to print this out. I'm going to export it now to the same Excel file, and then we'll print this another way as well. So we'll go to Excel. We're going to create a new worksheet, but we're going to put it into an existing workbook. And then we're going to go browse and find that workbook. And then I'm going to select the drop down. We are in the desktop, Get Great Guitars Reports, Section 7. And then we're going to double click on this report. And that should open up the report and create a new tab for that report. Now, once we make these in Excel, we'll also print them in PDF and try to compare and contrast how you might want to display these reports and give them to others. So here it is. Here's our profit and loss. They created sheet 1. I'm going to move it to the right because that's going to be the order that I printed them. I'm going to click on it, drag it to the right of the balance sheet, double click on it, and call it possibly just P and L. I'm going to remove the splits again, go into the View tab, Windows, Split Panes, Review the Splits. Now, again, we could just give this to our customer once we're done with this, or our boss, or whoever it needs these financial statements. Note that we also have the option of basically giving a PDF with these 2 forms on one PDF document by going to the File tab and going to the Print. And then we can change this printing to go to some type of acute PDF printer, in this case a free PDF printer that'll just print it to a PDF file. And the benefit of that is that if I change this active sheet to we want to print the entire workbook, is that we don't have to send multiple PDF files. We could just send the one PDF file, which will have the multiple documentations to it. Obviously, we need to delete that first tab. But here's our two worksheets here. So we can have those both with one file rather than having two files. So it's a little bit neater in some cases. I'm going to close this back out. We're going to save it. And we're going to say, okay, yes. And now we're going to create the next report, which is a transaction detail report. So we're going to go to reports up top. We're going to go to, this one will be in accounting and taxes. And we're looking for the transaction detail, not by account, so don't get confused with that one. Transaction list by date. We want a transaction list by date. So we'll select that item. Change the date range for the dates we are working on, 01/01/19 to 01/31/19. And this again, it's a great check for you to just kind of see what kind of activities has happened. If you're a supervisor and you want to say someone should have been entering data for the month of January, you want to see how much data has been entered, this gives us actual data, not by account, but the actual transactions that happened. If we're grading something, this helps. If we're comparing two things that should have the same stuff in it, then of course this will be good. So if we are working through this problem, for example, if we check off each amount here, it may be in a different order, maybe the dates are wrong or something like that, but if we have each amount and they're going to the same amount and split, then our financial statements should be the same. So if we go through each of these items, then everything should work out and our balance sheet and our income statement should then be the same. Note that this account has with it, if you check and say any of these items aren't here, you're going to say, okay, well, is the type correct? You can verify by type, which again, payment, sales receipt, deposit, check, invoice. Those are the forms that are driving our transactions. We didn't always use those particular forms. We may have used, for example, a check register to enter the check rather than entering the check form sheet, or the check register to enter a deposit. But QuickBooks will use these forms whenever a normal type of transaction happens, because these are what QuickBooks wants to use as the driving documentation. And so then we have the dates here. Now, if there's any number that's not here, first thing you want to do is check by adjusting the dates. Make this date something like 2018 and make this date something like 2020. And then say, okay, is anything added? Notice we have these items added because those are the items we put in there to start our company. So those are 2018. Other than that, nothing else should be added. If there is other things added, it may be the case that you entered something as of the current date, if that's either before or after the date that we're working this problem in, January 1st, 2019. If it is, then all you have to do is go into this account, whatever it is, double click on that transaction, change the date. That is, unless it's payroll. If it's payroll, that's wrong. The only way you can really fix payroll is to pretty much avoid the checks and process the payroll all over again. So again, payroll's one of those items you want to double, measure twice, cut once, right? You don't want to cut too short on the payroll. You want to try to do it right the first time. It'll save you more time than fixing any problems. It's not where you want to rush things through to save time. But here, of course, you could change a date and typically be okay. Now, again, that's not really great accounting to do that, because what you should do is not change it and make an adjusting entry so that we can see the audit trail, the problem and the solution to it, rather than just changing the date, which means we can't see the original problem or solution. That's better for auditing. That's better to give to a supervisor and whatnot. But if you're in the same month of operations, the easiest thing to do, of course, is to go in and change the date. If, again, anything is prior to this month of operations, you probably want to avoid changing any dates for the most part. So we're going to close this back out. So then, of course, we've got the name over here, and this will be vendor names or customer names typically, or other names, depending on what type of transaction we have. Sales receipts, customers, checks are going to be vendors. Memos, whenever we had a memo, and note you can make this wider or smaller depending on how relevant you think this memo column is. And then we have the split account, which is nice to have because that's going to give us which accounts are affected. So we have the account and the split account, which should give us both sides. Notice we can't see it all with these split transactions here, which are affecting more than two accounts typically, or something else is happening more than just two things are happening. And then we've got the amount over here. So if you take and tie everything else out here and everything looks correct, then you can get an idea. Our income statement and balance sheet should be exactly the same. If it doesn't come out correct, then you can see exactly where we are off and see how to make adjustments from there. And you could do that by then going to the balance sheet and seeing what's off there, and or double clicking and drilling down here. Okay, so let's print this out now. We're going to print this out and save it to the Excel form again. So let's go to Excel. We're going to create a worksheet, create a new worksheet, and we're going to put that to an existing workbook. Browse for that workbook. There it is. Oh, wait, that's not the one I want. We're going to go back up to Reports, Section 7. We want the Section 7 report. And export. So here we have it. We got the Section 7, we got the balance sheet. It put it in the middle between the profit and loss and the balance sheet. I'm going to take it and drag it to the right. And that's where we're going to have it. And we're going to double click on it. And I'm going to put something like transaction detail. Something like that. Now, the next thing we're going to do is go to the second tab over here, page layout. It's not a tab, but the second little icon. Click on here, and we're going to say that it's a transaction list report, transaction detailed report. And so notice it doesn't all fit on one page wide. So that's the problem we need to deal with. So I'm going to go back to the normal view. We can also see that by these little lines here. So we don't want to keep it like that, because if we give them the Excel document, whoever we're giving this to, not too bad. But if we print it to something like a PDF file, it's pretty ugly. So it would be nice for us, whether we print it or not, to format this a little bit nicer. So let's do that a little bit now. We're going to go to the View tab first, Windows, and unsplit the pane. So there we have this. Now we can see these little dotted lines. Those are going to be where the page breaks are. Typical things to try to get this on one page is to go to the page layout, and we're going to go to the orientation, and we're going to call it landscape. And that'll make it a little bit closer to getting it on one page wide. Now the next things we could do, it's not there yet because I don't want these on a separate report. So I'm going to go to the File tab and go to Print. And you could change that by saying I want to print everything on one page. So scaling and fit it to one page. So fit to one page. Fit sheet on one page, fit all columns to one. So you don't want the whole sheet, because that could make it really small. If you fit the sheet on one page, what you want is to fit the columns on one page. Now in our case, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two, but I'm not worried about the fact that it's 2 sheets long, right? If there's something on the other sheet, I'm not really worried about it. What I am worried about is that if it's 2 sheets wide, that's pretty ugly. I shouldn't have to tape together the paper to print the report. So that's what we're looking for here. Now, I'd rather not do this because it makes it really small still. Would rather do it without that, because if I go to the prior report now, if I was to print the whole sheet, print the whole workbook, I should say, and we go back to where we were, which is the last pages of our workbook, and we see this item here, then this one gets really small, right? If I go back to the prior sheet, the font is all a lot different. It's a lot smaller, possibly. So what we want to do is have a similar font size on all the sheets typically. And so typically, if you have to do this, fit to one column, do it. But if you don't need it, it'd be better not to. So I'm going to remove it. Go back to the our page here. And so the other thing we could do is we can minimize or make some of these columns wider or smaller. Or this date range here, this date item, I don't need that column at all. All right, I don't really need that. I could put that somewhere else, Or if I click here, it's included in the heading, so I don't need it. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm just going to remove these 3 columns. I'm going to put my cursor on there, highlight those 3 columns, dragging over, right click, and delete. So that's pretty close. That helps. Then all these middle columns, I don't really need these. So I'm going to put my cursor right there where I have a drop down, click on it, hold down Control. I want to pick this one. I'm holding down Control to get the non-adjacent. You could do it one at a time too. This one, this one, this one, this one. Don't really need those. I'm letting go of Control, right clicking the selected area, and delete. So that's another way you can, now it's down to 1 page. So that's another way you can kind of look at that. Now I'm going to save this. And now I'm going to delete this first tab. I don't need this first tab here. That's not helping. I'm going to right click on it and delete it. Say OK. Now again, if we wanted to print this or give this to someone, we can give them just this workbook. If they know Excel, they have these 3 tabs. They're all there. Or we can go to the File tab and we can go down to the Print and print them as the entire workbook, which will give 4 pages. The balance sheet, the income statement or profit and loss, and then 2 pages for the transaction detail. Here's page 1 and here's page 2. So that'd be a lot nicer. So if I print this out as a PDF file, then it'll give us that PDF file and be a lot nicer. So that's 2 ways we can give this information. The other way is to go back to our reports. I'm going to close this back out and just go to each one of these. And this would probably be the way that most people kind of think of how to print these reports. And that would be to either file, save them as a PDF, or print them as a PDF, this being the default. That's why I always do it, because if there's anything wrong with the save as, which there often is, you can go to just print the report. And if you have the cute PDF printer, you could just print it out here. So I'm going to just say print that, and then it's going to save it as a PDF because I printed it to the cute PDF printer, which is free. And we're going to go to the file here. We're going to go to, actually, no, that's not the file I want. We're going to go to the desktop. We're looking for this file. And we want the reports, 7. And then I'm just going to put the balance sheet. You probably want the date of 01. You can't put slashes here, right? So we're going to put in Windows at least 01/31/19. So we could do that, then do the same thing for the profit and loss. Go into the profit and loss in the open windows. We're going to go to print, report, print. And it should then open up this item again. And we're going to say income, or we could say P and L for January. We'll just abbreviate it with that and say save. And then the transaction report, same item, right? We could say transaction report in the open windows, print, report, and print it as a PDF. And I'm just going to call it transaction detail for January. And I know I have some of last year in there too, but I'll keep it for January. Now note, if we do it this way, we gotta zip this file or something. If we're gonna email this to somebody, we gotta zip the file, or we gotta attach multiple PDFs to it. That's why it's nicer sometimes to put it into Excel and then do that. Or at least if you do it this way, you might want to zip the files so they're in one file that they download rather than 3, and save that. Not too bad if there's only 3 reports, but if you got like 5 to 10 reports, then you want to think about how can you make this look as nice as possible. Presentation for bookkeeping is going to be half of what you're doing to make the clients happy, or for your own bookkeeping, presentations to yourself or to outside people like the bank or whoever, or your tax preparer, will make things a lot easier. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.